So my name is Pascal. I lead business development, partnerships, and sales at Smooch. It's all one big group today. And part of that is because we're still pretty small. So we're based out of Montreal. We took this picture a few months ago when we were 29 or 28 people, so I added 80% of another picture just to get us up to the actual head count today. We're about almost 50. I think we're actually up to 55 now. I finished these slides off, or I finished them last night, sorry about that, but I did this one a couple days ago, and we made a few new hires. So we're growing. We're effectively an API company. So if anybody listened to Sue's talk from Nexmo, we have a lot of similar products there. We're co-op competitors, or I'm not exactly sure how you say it, but we overlap in some spaces, which is, I think, helpful for people to understand context. So I'm basically going to tell you guys a little bit of a story of our path so far today. Some of the learnings that we've seen, we still haven't figured it all out. We've had really good success over the last couple of years, and so I think there are some things that we can share and help people take away from, but we're also here partly because we want to learn. And we're kind of at the next chapter of partnerships for Smooch, and so one of the big reasons we're here is to learn how we can do that. So some helpful context for you guys just to understand where we're coming from. We're an API product. We don't have any agent-facing UI or any UI that we distribute to companies, so we're not a full-stack product like a Zendesk or a ServiceNow. It's really a suite of APIs, and our mission is to make it really, really easy for businesses to build intimacy with their customers. So primarily in the customer service space, but it can also be marketing, it can be notifications, any form of communication. And the strategy, or the way that we're going about that, is effectively connecting all of the world's messaging channels or communication channels to all of the world's business systems, which is a large feat. And so the holy grail for the way that we think about the world is, imagine a place where you can have a communication with a business, and the notifications that you receive from that business on WhatsApp or by email or by text message are all part of the same interaction as when you respond or you reach out with a customer service inquiry. And when a salesperson from that company reaches out to talk to you about something, they're completely in the loop about all the communication that company has had with you in the past. And so really unifying that is a challenge, because what we're seeing in the space is that communication channels are getting fragmented, right? So there's all sorts of new different ways that you guys can message or communicate with businesses, and messaging is becoming a big part of that. And there's all sorts of different business systems, as we all know, that companies are using, whether it's marketing software, logistics software, sales software, et cetera. So our goal is to really unify these things, which is where partnerships and integration partnerships become super important and challenging. And so our focus is really on the messaging side of things. And there's a few reasons for that. So number one is we've seen a huge shift, or we've all seen a huge shift in the way people communicate between each other, right? So if you think about the number of interactions you've had with your spouse or with your parent or with your kid over the last few days, there's a high likelihood that most of that is over messaging, aside from face-to-face, obviously. But the last time I picked up the phone and actually called my wife to check in, it's typically just exchanging messages all day, right? And I do the same with my parents, I do the same with my friends. And so the P2P space, peer-to-peer, has really moved into messaging, and that's become a dominant form of communication. So much so that it exceeds social media usage. We spend a whole bunch of time, I think 5 times as long, on actual messaging apps than you do other apps on your phone. And the WhatsApps and Facebook Messengers of the world are just dominating that space. So on the P2P space, it makes a lot of sense, but on the B2B space, B2C space, where you're interacting with a business, it's not necessarily prevalent today. I had to rebook a flight with Air Canada. I spent about an hour on hold today because my line kept dropping, so I had to call back 4 times because there's no way for me to actually send messages and just tell them that I want to change from this flight to that flight. I know exactly what I need to do. I know exactly what they need to do. I'm willing to do it, but I have to wait on hold for a whole bunch of time over voice. So actually achieving B2C over messaging is something that's happening, but it's not necessarily pervasive everywhere yet. But it's opening up, right? So the last couple of years, especially last year, we've seen the opening up of a lot of these channels to businesses. So recently there's been a WhatsApp launch where they've allowed businesses to actually open up their business profiles on WhatsApp, so you can communicate with your favorite business over WhatsApp. Facebook was one of the first ones to do this with Messenger a couple of years ago. Apple has thrown their hat in the ring with Apple Business Chat. So there's all these different messaging channels which makes it really interesting from a consumer standpoint and a real pain in the ass if you're a business, right? Because now not only do you need to adopt messaging versus voice or other communication channels, but you need to figure out how to be on all of them, right? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the story of what we've been building. If you think about that octopus slide that I showed you, it's a great vision, and it would be amazing if we could achieve that overnight. But as everybody knows, the amount of softwares that you can integrate to and the amount of things that you can do is just is increasing every month. And so from a partnership standpoint, it can be quite challenging. So I'll walk you through just basically the story of Smooch and how we got here. And hopefully kind of the learnings that we've had will be insightful to you guys. So we actually started off in a parent company where we were a project. And so there was Radial Point was our parent company. We eventually ended up selling to AppDirect. Some of you guys heard Dan Sachs speak earlier today. And in that company, before it was sold, we had an incubation team that was working on new innovative products. And this is in 2013. And so they were looking at trends, and they were in the software space. And one of the ideas that came about was app usage is starting to die, right? So apps were the big thing around then, but people were starting to abandon apps. And so one of the ideas that came about was, or the hypothesis was, if somebody's getting frustrated with an app on their mobile device, can you insert some sort of low friction, either self-help or communication channel that can basically prevent them from churning, so that in the actual app experience they can get some help. And so effectively what came of it was our first public release, which was back in 2014. And really what Smooch, before it was even called Smooch, was an in-app SDK that you could drop into your app, or an SDK you could drop into your app, which connected to Zendesk. If everybody's familiar with what Zendesk does, competitor to Freshdesk, basically a simple email-based ticketing system that you can use to receive messages and exchange. And so we launched this all the way back in 2014. This is what it looked like. It was called Support Kit. People loved it. We got a ton of love in the industry. Developers loved it because all these developers were building these awesome apps, and it was really difficult for them to figure out when users were getting frustrated. And so this kind of allowed them to drop this in, get users to get in touch with them, and then they could build on these tickets and figure out what was wrong with their apps. A little bit of time went by later in the year, and we said, okay, well, what if people can't use Zendesk, right? Let's integrate to something else. And so Support Kit 2.0 came out, and effectively there's a video that I'm going to skip, but the video was, we send these messages to your inbox, right? So really simple. If you're a small developer with a small app, you drop this in your app. Anybody who's having trouble with your app can send a message, and we generate an email, send it to you. If you respond to the email, the message shows up in the app, right? So this was really the very, very beginnings of our big octopus, which effectively had email on the left-hand side and in-app chat on the right-hand side. And so we thought this idea had legs. We were getting a lot of love in the industry. And right towards the end of 2015, the parent company, Radial Point, was acquired. And so in the acquisition, the founders decided that this Support Kit thing had legs, and it wasn't really core to what AppDirect was doing. And so we actually carved out the IP and spun out and became Smooch. We raised a bunch of money. Actually, at this point, it was just some founder money. We got some space, which is now purple, but we haven't really changed it that much since. We'll be changing it soon. Got some chairs, and we turned it into Smooch. And Smooch 1.0 came out, which was effectively in-app messaging to different systems. And so the idea was, again, same concept, drop this in your app, but now you could use email, you could use Zendesk, you could use Help Scout, or you could even use an API, right? And so if you had your own system that you wanted to pipe these messages into, you could do that. And so really what came of that was, okay, we got to raise money, because now we think we've got something that's interesting. And what's the business, right? And so the idea was Smooch for business. And so really the target market was, we're going to sell this to businesses. And effectively what we're going to allow a business to do is plug into Smooch and route messages from their consumers to any system that they want. And so we needed to think about what are all the different communication softwares that exist, right? And so if we have a business that wants to buy from us, what software do they prefer to use? Is it Zendesk, Freshdesk, Help Scout, et cetera? And where are the channels that users are going to be on? And so this is actually the pitch slide that we brought into our investor deck when we raised our round, right? And so the idea was really simple. It was, we will be the hub that connects all the different contact points that a business can have with its consumers. and all of the different business systems that it may use on the bottom to actually control those experiences, right? So it's really just the slide I showed you earlier, but rotated 90 degrees. And so we brought this to investors, and we raised a ton of money. So we raised a $7.5 million seed, which for a seed round, especially for a Canadian company, was kind of unheard of. We got a lot of good press and a lot of traction. We attracted a lot of people. And so a year goes by, we bring up headcount, we get a lot of press, we get some snacks in the office, we have thousands of signups and all sorts of companies that are using Smooch for all sorts of different things. But we don't have any revenue. And so what we realized was, okay, this thing's got legs because we're getting a lot of love from the developer industry, but people don't really want to pay for it yet. And we were getting a lot of attrition because people were saying, well, this is great, but you're missing a system, or you're missing this integration, or you're missing this channel, you're missing this business system. And so we started to realize that unless we had the perfect ecosystem, it was going to be really difficult to sell this to the mass market. And so this is 2 years ago, at the beginning of 2017. So we put our heads together, we looked at what we had, and we thought back to the actual mission, and we were thinking to ourselves, so what's the problem here, right? How are we not able to achieve this rocket growth that we want to get? And so we reconfigured kind of our slide, and we said, well, actually what the problem here is this is just a two-sided marketplace. Right? And so, I mean, this kind of looks nicer because you can modify messages and do all sorts of stuff. But really, when you think about it, you've got all sorts of software systems that we need to integrate to. Someone needs to integrate to, right? Whether we build up a great ecosystem where we encourage them to do it or we do it ourselves. And there's all these different channels that are opening up and they're proliferating, but we couldn't get a seat at the table with these channels, right? And so every time we went to talk to the Apple guys who we knew were rolling out Apple Business Chat, they'd write us off because they'd say, who are you guys? Right? You're a bunch of Smooch guys in Montreal. Every time we went to talk to WhatsApp, they said, no, there's nothing going on. We don't really need any help from you guys. And what would you really bring to the table? And so it was this dilemma, or this two-sided marketplace dilemma, where it was difficult for us to actually get traction. So what we really had was a couple of integrations, which we had built ourselves. And we built them because the APIs were open. And they were good enough that we could build something good. And on the right-hand side was the same. It was channels that were completely open to the public that we could go out and build actual integrations to. And so this is why I think the talk that I'm giving is a little bit different than what we've been hearing all day, because ultimately we did the opposite. So what we decided to do is, rather than do a partnership strategy, which was where we were headed from the very beginning, we gave up on the whole partnership strategy at the beginning because we said, we're just too small for anyone to want to partner with us. So let's actually take this and sell it. And so what we realized was that when we went to talk to software companies and we said, let's build a partnership, the partnership guys said, yeah, sure, maybe, right? But then they had other things to do and we weren't really at the top of the list and it was really difficult. But when we took the same product and we brought it, because we're an API platform, and we brought it to a product manager at a Zendesk or at a Freshchat, which we eventually did our deal with Rajiv's colleagues, or with others, we said, hey, there's all these different messaging platforms that are opening up. And all the ones that are open, we've integrated to them. And you can either spend all your time building what we've built over the last couple of years, but have had trouble selling, or you can integrate to Smooch, right? And by doing so, we will effectively be your single pipe that communicates with all the channels. And so we went a completely different route, and we decided to OEM this, right? And so all of this functionality was completely, or the fact that Smooch was there, was completely invisible to Zendesk's customers. We decided, let's just sell this and license it to Zendesk. So we developed what was called Smooch Inside, right? Where the target was now different. Rather than selling to a business and partnering with all of these software companies, we decided to actually sell to the software companies. And so we got 1 or 2 deals at the very beginning, or at least a lot of interest, and a lot of people who said, yeah, this could really solve a problem for me, because I need to go out and build these integrations myself as well. And so this became the pitch, right? We went to software providers, and we said, there's all these different messaging channels. They're all, there's more and more of them that are coming out. Let us tackle that piece for you, right? And so it was a really interesting pitch that was starting to get a lot of reception. And so we basically decided all of our marketing, all of our sales team, we had 6 people that were on our sales team that we had just hired. We completely got rid of the whole sales team because they were, selling to small businesses. We needed to sell to enterprise, completely different pitch. We were now selling to product managers. We ripped up the whole thing, and we said, who are the 50 top software companies in the world that Smooch must work with? And we were laser focused. We did nothing else. We made sure that all of our marketing and all of our materials said nothing but that, and that it was crystal clear that if you worked for one of these 50 companies, you would be stupid not to buy this from Smooch. And the fact that you were paying us for it made it so that we were a lot more interesting, which I just think is something that we're constantly wrestling with in partnerships, is that the exact same product that these software companies could have just integrated to free of charge, right, but then had their customers go buy from us, they were willing to pay much, much more money for to have it licensed within their technology. Because now you reduce the friction of having to send your customers to Smooch and buy from Smooch. And at the very beginning, when Smooch was no one, I wouldn't say that we're the biggest company in the world now, but we're definitely very popular in this space. At the very beginning, it was very difficult to convince your customers, if you're a Zendesk salesperson, to go and buy a Smooch license to tack on. And so we said, okay, let's just go really, really hard on these 50. Today, we've got 16 of the 50, which is actually a pretty good ratio, that are actually OEM customers licensed with our technology inside. We've got about 12 of them that, it's funny, but as we started to pitch the we'll sell to you, eventually the discussions went to actually we'd rather partner. And so we wound up doing the thing that we couldn't get them to do a couple years before. And we've got about 10 of them that I like to think are going to close in the next few months, but we'll see where they go. So we wound up actually getting a really big proportion of these people to work with us through just coming up with a different model that seemed to suit their needs. And so now we're in 2018. About middle of 2018 is about a year has gone by since we've done this shift in strategy. And we've got all of these really popular software providers that are using our tech. Now, we're invisible on their website, right? You don't go on Freshworks' website or Oracle's or Zendesk, and they don't talk about us anywhere. You actually have to dig in the fine print that says we're a data sub-processor. But at the end of the day, these are OEM agreements. And so we don't have a sales force that's selling. This is really just embedded inside of the product. But here's what happened, is that, number one, it gave us revenue. So as a startup that had raised a bunch of money, hired a bunch of people, and didn't necessarily have forever to live, this was really important, right? And so we haven't raised our A round yet because we haven't had to, right? It wound up extending our life dramatically because we're actually making a lot of money now. So that was nice. It also meant that we could put real traffic on the platform, right? And so we can actually scale much, much faster when we license to these companies versus selling one brand at a time. Because when we signed our deal with Zendesk, right, or with Freshworks, they brought their slew of customers to whom they opened up this traffic to. And that effectively brought on much, much faster scale to our platform. And so that's allowed our ops team to learn from all our mistakes and get a lot better. And the biggest thing was that in the industry, we mattered. Right? And so this was our hack to effectively get to a respectable enough size that we could actually talk about real partnerships with people. Because now we actually have people who want to partner with us. So at the time, we had a whole bunch of channels, but it still wasn't necessarily enough. I mean, the left ones were channels that we built ourselves, and then the other ones were ones that we had just gone out and built. And we were having a lot of trouble getting a seat at the table with Apple and WhatsApp and all the other guys. But as soon as we started to bring these logos to the door, we would talk to the folks at Apple Business Chat or the folks at WhatsApp and say, if you let Smooch in, we will connect Zendesk and Freshworks and LiveChat and Genesys and all these guys, because we are literally the gateway to these systems. And so that allowed us to develop a whole bunch of new partnerships with a whole bunch of new channels. Partly some of these channels were opening up, and so it kind of worked out. But we would have never had a seat at the table with some of these guys if we hadn't had that base of customers that we were bringing to the discussion. And so at this point, we tackled one of the sides. And so now we've got a very respectable list of channels where we do the most channels in the industry. We integrate to everything, and we can actually claim to be messaging experts, where we actually have really good relationships with these messaging platforms. And so when we have people come to us, we can help them get connected on whatever they need. And it started, I wouldn't say it's necessarily completely tackled the left-hand side, but we now have a way in to all of these other systems. We have a relationship with them. They're OEM agreements, right, which isn't the same as a partnership or a co-sell or a referral partnership that a lot of the people are talking about in the other rooms, but they are a start, right? We know the product managers. Our product is directly integrated into their software. We know how that software works. And so there's a path for us to get there. And so, are we by any means, have we accomplished what we've set out to accomplish? I would say we're on our way there, but I definitely wouldn't tell you that we're completely there. But what it's allowed us to do is start to bring in actual brands. And so these are real brands that pay us real money, because I can show you slides of, we're trusted by thousands of companies, but those are just people who sign up. But these are actual companies that have legitimate enterprise agreements with Smooch and that put real traffic on us for various use cases, right? And so most of these have been opportunistic. They've been brands that have come to us because over time, we've built up a reputation, and they've started to hear our name when they work with some of these software providers or some of these channels. And so I wouldn't tell you that we've cracked it yet and that we've cracked the two-sided marketplace, but we're definitely starting to feel like we're onto something. So what's next? I think I killed the last slide. That's too bad. It was a shrug like this. So I think I got rid of it. I think it didn't update. But basically what's next is, we're here. And so we are fundamentally at crossroads within Smooch, where we have a really good base of partnerships that are mostly OEM partnerships. And so we're continuing to scale that up, and we're continuing to get to drive sales in that way. And we're also starting to build up a legitimate partnership function. So we hired a VP sale who starts Tuesday, and he'll be taking that function away from me, and I'll be able to actually spend more time on legitimate partnerships, non-paying partnerships, which is going to be interesting. So, and we've got a small BD team that's growing every day, which is pretty cool. So that's where we are, and happy to take questions.
Anyone have any questions? Guess not. I have a quick question. How did you come up with the name Smooch?
We hired a consultant and spent too much money. So the real story is we build intimacy between businesses and consumers, and so Smooch was meant to be what you feel when you build that intimacy. But that was before I actually joined the company. I was not responsible for that name. But it's actually interesting because Smooch was effectively when we were originally meant to be a direct-to-business sale. Right, and so when I joined, part of my role was bringing us to this ISV licensing model, and the word Smooch just completely killed us there, because we would go to the likes of Oracle and Genesys and talk to their product managers and say, trust us and build us into your system, and our name was Smooch. So we've gotten past that now with growth, but it was difficult in the early days. I wouldn't recommend it.
There's only one Smooch in the SaaS space, I guess.
No, so the other one is a dating site.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, well. Smooch.com. Yeah. We'll get there. We'll buy them out soon.
Yeah, you can always license your URL if you need to enter an exit, right? Any other questions? Okay, let me give you the mic.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm just wondering if you could share whatever you feel comfortable sharing with in terms of the commercial arrangements with your OEM partners.
No, it's a great question. So we've tried a whole bunch of stuff, and I would say the good news is that, or for us, was we ultimately, our costs are based on traffic, right? We're an API platform, and so at the end of the day, the bulk of our costs are based on traffic. And so taking a license that you would normally sell to a brand, which ultimately just does a smaller amount of volume, it wasn't that difficult for us to come up with a model that we could then sell to OEM. It was effectively you buy more from us and you get volume discounts. Like if you really think about it, there's support and all sorts of other pieces that we had to think through a little bit. But it is something that we've had to be really careful about, because we've always known that the mission for Smooch is not just to sell to software providers. That's one market that we've realized does well. But we've continued to sell to businesses who want to buy from us, and we knew that we would eventually double down on that effort again. We took a big pause when we did that focus, so we never wanted to cannibalize that business or set ourselves up where the model was so fundamentally different that people could arbitrage. So we ultimately continue to sell by volume, and because it's an OEM deal, they'll do a lot of volume with us and they can consolidate that.
Just a quick question about the functionality of the software. Do you actually, can a customer start a conversation online and pick it up on WhatsApp and it's the same conversation?
That's right.
And how do you do that?
So we're effectively a persistence layer that sits in between. So if you go back to that octopus slide, we're really the hub that's sitting in between the software and the channels. And the way that we do it technically is we create a Smooch ID. And we'll associate a user's endpoints to that ID. It's all programmatic. So if the Four Seasons, for example, runs all of their concierge messaging on us, and so if you chat with any Four Seasons hotel around the world from any channel, whether it's WeChat or WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger, they're creating a system of record that's linked to ours. And so they'll authenticate you, they'll have you log in if you've got a Four Seasons ID, and then they'll know it's the same person.
WeChat ID, and then you just map it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
What kind of partnerships are you thinking about doing next?
Yeah, that's a great question. So were you there for Sue's talk earlier, a couple hours ago? So Sue's from Nexmo. And I would say it's somewhat, like we've been building that as well, but it's somewhat similar. And so the way that we think about it is there's integration partners. So folks who might not necessarily want to OEM or where it just doesn't make sense. And it makes sense for our technologies to speak to each other. So a great example would be Stripe, right? So we have a Stripe integration so that in a chat you can collect money from someone. And Stripe is the payment processor that's doing that, right? So it makes sense for us to not necessarily sell to Stripe because Stripe isn't a messaging platform. They wouldn't need our technology inside. But it makes a lot of sense for us to work nicely with Stripe. With Freshworks, which is probably a great example, we've been talking to the Fresh Chat team, which is a very chat kind of two-way, based asynchronous messaging platform for a long time. And we've got an OEM deal that we signed a little while ago, and we're inside of that platform. But then Rajiv's product, which is a separate product in the Freshworks ecosystem, they've got a different strategy. They want to be integration partners. And so there, you can buy a Smooch license, buy a Freshworks license or a Freshdesk license, and put them together, right? And so we see integration partnerships as kind of the main one. It's all the different tiles on that slide that we need to build. And then there's distribution partners, which would be folks like Deloitte that Sue mentioned earlier, people who are recommending software, not necessarily integrating their technology, but just distribution channels. It's just confusing because when we say channels, we mean WhatsApp. But yeah, those would be the two big categories I would say of partnerships. And then eventually converting, what we're starting to see is some of those OEM partnerships want to also be integration partnerships. And that's really like the fun part about my job, but it's also super frustrating, is you have all these dual relationships with these companies, right? Because they want some of our technology inside, but then they also want, for the stuff they haven't built inside, they want to have an open integration. And we want that too, because we're more valuable if we've got all these different systems you can integrate through us. Yeah.
Any other questions? One back here.
So just a quick one around Salesforce. Not Salesforce, but your Salesforce. So part of, I think, the challenge with, SIs and such, you need to help them a little bit initially to kind of know what they're doing. And my guess is even some of your OEMs, the ability to really sell the new messaging capability you provided is not always there. So what are your thoughts, right? Initially we're not going to really do direct brand sales, just here and there, but what are your thoughts around what is your sales team going to look like in a year or two from now?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, last year, our BD team incorporated sales, partnerships, and account management, and we were 3 people. Now we're up to, I think we're 9. And we've got a VP sales starting next week, and so we're carving out a sales function, which will purely be responsible for selling. We've got Kurt, who's in the room, who was selling only because that's what we needed to do at the time, who's going to be moving more into partnerships, and we've got a dedicated account management team for anybody that's paying and showing love. So we see it as 3 kind of functions, right? We've got sales, account management, and then we've got partnerships. And partnerships is really anyone who's not exchanging money with Smooch, but is some sort of integration partner or distribution channel. And I would tell you that in the OEM world, what we saw was that we tried very hard to encourage adoption of the product, but the truth is it's pushing rope, right? Because at the end of the day, you're licensing your technology and you're putting it in somebody else's product. And they're figuring out, they might pick your brain in terms of, how can this product be better? But it's really difficult because you're that much further removed from the end user, right? And so if we sell to Zendesk, Zendesk's product manager then needs to create the whole product around that messaging and then go to market with that product and then train their customers to use that in their sales force. And so other than helping them a little bit with how can they get their sales team up and running on WhatsApp and knowing how those things work, there's not much for us to do there. But I agree with you that, part of the reason we haven't had, part of the reason we ended up being laser focused was because we didn't have enough people. And so that's a big chapter for us, is starting to figure out how the sales team, I was really interested when Sue from your team was talking earlier on how the sales and partnerships team, how those two fit. I don't think we've cracked it by any means, but I think they definitely need to at least sit next to each other because there's tons of overlap between those two functions.
Okay, any other final questions? We're coming up on the hour, so. All right, well, Pascal, thank you so much.
Thanks,
This was
everyone.
great.